On our way into Central Oregon on this trip, we came upon the Mayville Cemetery. So we stopped and wandered around in the cemetery, and it was extremely interesting and really an eye-opener because most of the grave markers were from the turn of the 19th century into the 20th century, or a little before. These were the pioneers that settled the area, and most of them were born in the 1840s. Some were born in the early teens of the 20th century. Most of them were from Western Europe, with a few from Eastern Europe. Many of the grave markers were made out of marble. Some were made out of granite. Many of them had small children buried there. The area was definitely settled by Western Europeans though, and they cleared all the shrub steppe, the sagebrush community out, and began to farm it. There was no irrigation out there, and they were dryland farming. And this is an extremely arid area, so their production rates were probably fairly low. But many of them apparently stuck it out and increased their acreages to gain more crop. The other interesting thing that was out there was a lot of the design of the gravestones from the turn of the century. Many of them were from the Masons. Many of them were woodsmen and neighbors of woodsmen. And so that was very interesting to see. We just don't see woodsman-type grave markers anymore in cemeteries, where they actually have a formed trunk of a tree with their names and all kinds of epitaphs on them. So that was very interesting. Another item that we saw in that area were large numbers of American kestrels. We counted 14 in about a mile and a half, which is a large number of kestrels, which are a type of native falcon to North America. And this falcon is small and it hovers. It's one of the only falcons that hover. And they hunt grasshoppers and mice. And when they live in areas where there are no trees, they typically nest in cut banks, in burrows, rodent burrows in cut banks, or old buildings. They are fantastic rodent control agents. In the fall of the year, kestrels collect, or stage as it's called, and they begin their migration south. Not all kestrels migrate out of the northwest or away from desert areas. There are actually kestrels that come out of Canada that winter in the Columbia Basin and the Great Basin. So they're a very interesting species. They have upwards of 4 young. They're very good parents because the adult kestrels are not afraid of any aerial predator or mammalian predator. They really go after them. However, they also lose chicks, especially to the common raven. Ravens often will wait when the chicks finally get up almost ready to fledge and they're plump and fat, then the ravens come and get them, but not before. So they're looking for the biggest meal with the least amount of energy. And they know they've got to run the gauntlet with the parents. So they will grab a big, almost full-grown chick and take off with them. Kestrels also eat small snakes and grasshoppers, crickets. So very interesting bird of prey. Another organism that we saw there were several butterfly species. We had Lorquin's admiral show up there. This is a highly territorial brushfoot butterfly, absolutely beautiful. Lorquin's admirals are found all over western United States, especially in the Pacific Northwest, and from low elevation clear up to the top of the Steen Mountain, which is 9,700 feet. They are also a species that migrates. It's not unusual to find them in the fall, August and September, migrating south, away from winter. And so it's always fun to trip across a Lorquin's Admiral. When you look at the photo of the Lorquin's Admiral, look at the tips of the upper wings and you'll see this rust, beautiful rust on them, and black and white lines on them, and they are absolutely eye-catching. They love to spend time in willows and alders and poplars, so they love deciduous trees. So along the road, as we were headed south into Central Oregon, we came across an absolutely beautiful plant, and it's called snakeweed. And why it was named snakeweed, I have no clue. I haven't been able to find any reason to name this beautiful blooming plant snakeweed. It blooms in the hottest, driest portion of the summer, and it has a small, probably no more than 1/8 of an inch across bloom, but yet it's a composite flower. So in reality, it's many micro flowers in the center of that bloom, and the outer edge of those micro flowers hold a petal. So it actually looks like a single flower with petal. But in reality, it is actually many flowers. Insects, small bees and wasps nectar on those plants. It only blooms in the late summer, early fall, and they're beautiful, and they're covered with yellow blooms. Another plant we found along the John Day River was the goldenrod, and there are many species of goldenrod, but this particular one was in full bloom and is super important to pollinators, especially at the end of the summer into the fall of the year. It's used by many different insects, but it's very important pollinator. And so goldenrod can stand up to 3.5 feet tall, and it provides loads of nectar and pollen to insects, but also it provides places to lay their eggs for the next year. So there is a wasp that stings the goldenrod, creates a gall in the goldenrod stem, lays its egg in there, and that's where the young wasp spends the winter. So really important. It used to be considered a bad weed, and so settlers and lots of home folks would jerk it out of the ground and get rid of it. I would never remove goldenrod. It is so important to pollinators. A great spot that we also visited was the Crooked River Canyon, which is where the Crooked River, oddly enough, flows down through this deep 300-foot deep canyon. It is an amazing sight, but because of the tremendous topography and the cliff faces, there are birds that live there that you don't find many places. One of the species is the turkey vulture. They roost and nest on the cliff face walls of that 300-foot cliff. And yesterday we had the privilege of watching them. They were going in, catching thermals up from the hot ground. They were flying below us, they were flying all around us. And some interesting things about turkey vultures is they have a dihedral. When they fly, their wings are at a V, and it allows them to tip and rock, and they hardly ever flap. They're always just tipping and rocking, and then they fold their wings a little bit and go shooting down to the next thermal, and then you see them climbing the next thermal. Turkey vultures are a big bird, and they leave the Pacific Northwest on the east side of the mountains in fall and migrate south to the California coast and the Central Valley of California. If you go to Bodega Bay, south past San Francisco and on down, along the coast you will find in the winter thousands and thousands of turkey vultures. Turkey vultures are scavengers. They are not predators, and they feed on dead and rotting animals. That's their job. And they have learned to pick up the scent of decomposition in the air. And oftentimes it only takes as much as 3 to 4 parts per million of decomp in the air, and they can scent it, and they follow that decomposition right to its source, and they eat that rotting animal. Turkey vultures are truly phenomenal. Their heads are naked, their neck is naked, and that's for a very good reason. Their bodies are in dark, slate gray feathers and brown, very dark, and that's for a very good reason. And the reason is because they use solar radiation from the sun. They hold their wings out after they've been feeding on a carcass, and the solar radiation kills all the pathogens that they pick up from that carcass. Their heads are naked so that there's no feathers to get all kinds of gore and decomp in their feathers. It's naked skin. And the sun, once again, bakes the pathogens that they pick up when they feed on a carcass. So they feed, and then they go sit in the sun and burn it all up. And they'll sit there sometimes for an hour, just soaking up the sun, killing all the pathogens and germs that they pick up. So they are designed to feed on dead animals. That's what they do. Vultures have some of the strongest stomach acids in the world because they also swallow bone, and they swallow all kinds of organisms, maggots, worms, flies. They swallow all that, and beetles, and that's all dissolved in their stomach acids. Vultures' nesting and roosting sites are covered with what we call paint, which are their droppings, and it's white. Their nesting sites are white. And frankly, vultures don't care if any other bird of prey or anyone knows where their nest is, because nothing bothers them. They will just walk up to the entrance of their nesting burrow or cavity and squirt. And it's not a dainty little squirt. They squirt out prodigious amounts of paint, and it covers the rocks below it, and they do that repeatedly. Then in midsummer, the adult will start to molt, and they molt out their flight feathers, their secondary feathers, their body feathers, but it's all done in stages, and it is what's called a synchronized molt. So they molt the same feathers on their wings at the same time, and then new feathers grow right in, and they are never incapable of flight. They're always out looking for the scent of dead animals, decomposition. And yes, they feed on the smallest rodent that dies. If that rodent is rotten and they catch that scent, they'll follow it for a quarter to a half mile to find that little rodent that's rotting, and they'll eat it. They eat dead insects, they eat dead snakes, they eat dead anything. Fish are one of their favorites. Periodically, the federal government will poison carp, a big, nasty, introduced fish, and they pile them in big piles on the shoreline to get them out of the water as they rot. I have seen it where vultures by the dozens accumulate on those piles of dead carp, and they just rip them to pieces. But they have to be nice and tender, and they feed on all that rotting tissue. So they're a valuable, valuable bird in the ecosystem. We as humans create thousands and hundreds of thousands of dead animals on our roadways. And if you are anywhere where there's vultures, you will sometimes see them sitting along roadways at a roadkill deer or a skunk or a possum, because they will come in to feed on those carcasses. Living along the edge of the Great Crooked River Canyon is a species of lizard. It's very common there, but it's called the western fence lizard. A lot of people have another name for it. It's called a bluebelly. Western fence lizards can grow up to about 9 inches long. They're very husky lizard, and they are insect feeders. They will sit on a sunny rock, warm up, because they too rely on the warmth of the sun in order to become active. So early in the day, they will crawl up onto a rock, a warm rock, and get warmed up. They have no way of producing internal heat, such as a mammal does. So once they warm up, they become very active, and they are very good at grabbing flies and insects that are trying to warm up as well. They feed on lots and lots of different insects. Fence lizards in turn get fed on by all kinds of different animals, including other lizards. Lots of birds feed on them, lots of mammals, rodents feed on them, coyotes, raccoons, all kinds of animals feed on the western fence lizard. Fence lizards belong to a family called Scleroporus, and they are a lizard family that are huge. It's a massive family, and members of their family are found all the way from Mexico clear into Canada and all across the United States. They are interesting because the female is very protective of her territory. Males tend to wander around a little bit. They have these beautiful sky blue markings all down the belly. They are extremely important as a prey base item for many western predators. They also are hunted by snakes. A lot of snakes go after fence lizards. So very important animal to have around. A lot of people get really disgusted when fence lizards end up in your house. The interesting thing is they're eating spiders and insects that come into your house. So you would do well to leave them alone or take them outside and let them go. An amazing little animal and very valuable. We are standing in one of the most amazing sites. It's a national forest, and this is called the Crooked River National Grasslands. This is a climax shrub steppe community, and by that I mean it can't grow up anymore. The western junipers can get older and taller, but all of the species that are going to be here are here. Should a fire go through here, it will start all over again. And over thousands of years, this area has burned, either from lightning strikes or the tribes would light it on fire, but it has burned. And it always starts out with new growth, grasses, and forbs. And forbs are blooming plants. And then rabbit brush comes in, then sagebrush comes in, and then junipers arrive, and it starts all growing up again. So when you see some beautiful stand of shrub steppe community like this, you know that this is at its climax. It's not getting any different. The diversity of plants are here. So this is an arid desert. And what's amazing about it is surface water is only here during the spring of the year and maybe on wet years into early summer. After that, the water's gone. We located a water source, a spring, that has been dumped into a large rubber tire, and it has a deep pool. And all the local desert birds have discovered that site in order to drink. And as the ambient air temperature during the daylight increases, the sparrows and all the birds come in to get water. Well, another thing happens is insects also come into that water source, and that attracts other kinds of birds. So today we saw some other species there. But some of the species that came in good large numbers were brewer's sparrows. Brewer sparrows are neotropic migrants, and they migrate south into Mexico in the winter and arrive here in late April to breed. Brewer sparrows are a sagebrush obligate. They don't nest anywhere except in dire droughts outside of sagebrush areas. Another species that showed up were vesper sparrows, and we even had a subadult lark sparrow that showed up there. And these are larger birds that also require sagebrush. Vesper sparrows can nest in another mix of plants, but larks have to have sage as well. So these are birds that are obligated to nest in sagebrush habitat, which makes sagebrush very, very important. So they all come to this water source and they're drinking there. And Dan was able to get some amazing photographs of brewer sparrow, vesper sparrow, and a lark sparrow. So that was very nice. Nothing is ever wasted in the natural world. Everything is utilized. Nothing happens by chance. Nothing is ignored. So everything is utilized by one species or another. So when there is a pool of water like we found today, that's an invaluable treasure because every living organism needs water. And if they can come to a water source and get a drink, they do it. So super important spot. This entire grassland area and the sagebrush community that lives here hosts huge diversity of plants and animals that depend on this site. So it's not just a useless sagebrush area. It's very, very important.